Good morning to everyone in the United States. Good evening to everyone in India. And namaste to everyone around the world. We welcome you to this webinar on yoga and conflict management hosted by the American Academy of Yoga and Meditation. For our new viewers who are joining us for the first time, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce to you the American Academy of Yoga and Meditation. AAYM is a nonprofit organization for physicians, researchers, medical professionals, and practitioners of yoga and meditation. The organization is dedicated to education and research by fostering an interdisciplinary approach by linking science, arts, ethics, and spiritualism to improve ways of human life. Today, we will hear from some of the renowned speakers on the topic of yoga for conflict management. Everyone encounters conflicts every single day, whether that be in our families, in our communities, or even in our societal lives. Everyone has conflicts, children, youth, or even adults. And because of these conflicts, many people have got anxiety, and some have even suffered severe depression. But is there a way to combat these conflicts? This is exactly what we will be learning more about in this webinar, Yoga for Conflict Management. And now, it is my honor to inform you all our speakers for today's webinar. Our first speaker will be Shri Paritosh Sharan, who is a life and wellness coach, a counselor, and a master yoga practitioner. We will also be listening to Shri Anil Kumar, who is the Chief Secretary at the Department of Home Guards in Uttar Pradesh, India. And lastly, we will be listening to Professor Ashish Pandey, who is an associate professor at a school of management, along with being an associate professor at the Indian Institute of Technology in Mumbai, India. Though we initially had Shri Suthirtha Bhattacharya ji as our speaker today, he was not able to join us today due to some unavoidable circumstances. Professor Ashish Pandey has graciously accepted our invitation to join us on this discussion, and we are very thankful for that. Welcome to our studio, Professor Ashish ji. And now, I would like to take the time to introduce the well-known Dr. Himanshu Rai, who will be our moderator for today's webinar. Dr. Rai is the director at the Indian Institute of Management in Indore and the professor at the Indian Institute of Management in Lucknow. He has obtained his PhD also from the Indian Institute of Management, and he has worked at Tata Steel Company in India. It is my pleasure to have you all today with us. Once again, I would like to welcome all of our viewers around the world to this wonderful webinar, and I will now pass it on to Dr. Himanshu Rai. Namaste.
Namaste, and thank you so much, Sagar, for that wonderful starting to this particular panel discussion on yoga and conflict management. And I would like to first of all thank all the eminent panelists in here for taking out time, and I'm sure that the discussions out here starting from now are going to be very, very insightful. So allow me to introduce our panelists for today. We have Mr. Anil Kumar, and Anil happens to be a friend as well, who's an officer of the 1989 batch of the Indian Administrative Services. And at present, Anil is the additional chief secretary with the state of Uttar Pradesh, India. He has been a key driver of automation of various bureaucratic processes under the Ease of Doing Business initiative. His affinity and passion for yoga is perhaps genetic, a legacy of his father, who had been a Hatha yogi with profound practice of various asanas till his demise at the age of about 80 years. A set of 108 Surya Namaskars, Shirshasana, and hours of meditation has been a part of Anil's daily routine for years. Continuing this family tradition of yoga, Anil has a dedicated and disciplined yogasana and meditation routine, in addition to his passionate pursuit of other fitness activities such as marathon running, calisthenics, etc. He has delivered lectures and conducted sessions on the theory and practice of yoga as enshrined in Patanjali's Yoga Darshan, Srimad Bhagavad Gita, and Hatha Yoga, to students in universities, to officers of various government departments and various fitness groups. Yoga, to Anil, is the path of joy, resilience, balance of simplifying life, and the pinnacle of positive psychology. A very warm welcome to you, Anil.
Thank you so very much, Himanshu. Thank you for a wonderful introduction. It is a pleasure. It is a pleasure. And thank you so much for the invitation.
Our next panelist is Mr. Paritosh Sharan, who's a life and wellness coach, an executive coach, Marshall Goldsmith executive and team coach, behavioral and OD consultant, counselor, master practitioner, and trainer of NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, and of course, a motivational speaker. A Kriya Yogi himself, Paritosh has explored many schools of yoga, quantum healing techniques, and has extensive research on neuropsychology, Vedanta, theosophy, energy healing, hypnosis, neuro-linguistic programming, human process work over a decade-long period. He has developed many interventions integrating and merging the wisdom and pragmatism of the East and the West, which he uses for development of individuals as well as organizations. Paritosh comes with over 23 years of rich corporate experience in leading organizations such as, and obviously we share this organization between the two of us, Tata Steel, and subsequently Satyam Computers, Oracle, HCL Technologies, and Tech Mahindra, etc., before he founded an organization called Transhuman Consulting, dedicated for an integrated and holistic approach to human transformation involving mind, body, and spirit. Welcome, Paritosh.
Thank you, Dr. Himanshu.
Thank you. And our next panelist is Professor Ashish Pandey, who's an associate professor at Shailesh J. Mehta School of Management, IIT Bombay. He completed his fellow program in management, which is equivalent to a PhD, from MDI Gurgaon. And Ashish is also a visiting faculty with IIM Ahmedabad, MDI, and Tata Institute of Social Sciences. His research areas are spirituality in management, yoga and positive psychology, and business and society interface. And that's where our research paths are actually pretty similar. His research papers and approach notes have appeared in reputed international journals and periodicals like the Journal of Management, Journal of Business Ethics, European Review, to name a few. Ashish has also been regularly engaged with various organizations and institutions for leadership and organizational development work. In fact, he's conducted a lot of studies which have looked at organization level interventions to look at the impact of yoga, and obviously he's going to talk about it subsequently. Thank you very much for being on the panel, Ashish.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, yoga and conflict management. Conflict is an ever-present reality in everybody's life. And conflict is defined as differences in and among individuals. Now, differences among individuals is easy to understand. I may have a difference with Anil, Anil may have a difference with Paritosh, Paritosh may have a difference with Ashish, and these are differences among individuals. But there are also differences within individuals. We can have differences within ourselves, and that is one area which is very, very critical. I'll give you a very brief background of how did I get interested in conflict management, particularly that of internal conflict. My PhD happens to be in negotiation. Clearly, I was looking at conflict since the year 2000 when I decided to shift into academia. But this year, during the COVID, in 2020, in July, in a span of 1 week, I got messages from 7 or 8 people who were facing depression. And the depression was a result of some of the internal conflicts that they faced. And I realized that we need to do a lot more than we were to address this problem about conflicts. And therefore, in my personal capacity, I initiated something called a Center for Conflict Management, which is a voluntary organization that actually looks at creating an inclusive, peaceful, and vibrant world. While on the one hand, I have an amazingly good news, and that is that within these few months that we established ourselves, and this is less than 9 months from the time that we started, we are already present in every state of our country. We are present in most of the important cities of our country, and we are present in 5 countries: the United States, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Australia, and Panama. But the other news, which is what I would like to draw the attention of everyone, and particularly to my panelists when we have them over here, is we have resolved about 1,600 conflicts so far. And of those 1,600 conflicts, 40% of the conflicts are conflicts which are within individuals. These are the conflicts that they face between multiple alternatives. These are the conflicts that they face between their head and their heart. These are the conflicts that they face between their judgment and desire. And therefore, we need to understand that this conflict that arises out of the desires in the mind are something that we need to address. The Yajurved says, Yad jagrito duru mudaiti, daivam tadu suptasya tathaivaiti, duram gamam jyotisham jyotirekam, tanme mana shiv sankalpamastu. This mind of ours, it travels and wanders as far in the state of wakefulness as it does while we are in the state of sleeping. And therefore, it is this mind that we need to control. How can we control it, and how can yoga help us in controlling this mind is going to be something that we are going to discuss. So let me welcome all the panelists out here and request them to come up with their opening statements. So I'll start with you, Paritosh, your opening statements on this topic.
Right, I'll make a brilliant introduction, Dr. Himanshu. You made at least my job very easy in putting that context behind it. Couple of statements which I like to make here. You know, coming from the land of yoga, it said that, you know, one of the conflict is the rational mind and the faith, right? These two. It said that the Indian mind is one such mind which can hold rational as well as faith together without any conflict. Okay, so that gave me a great insight into how do we do that. So there is another statement, one quote I got from Rumi. He said, "Out beyond ideas of wrongdoings and right doings, there is a field. I will meet you there." You know, so there is a space where both of these conflict. You know, what happens is when we are talking of a conflict between two ideas, two concepts, two values, whatever it could be, whether it is internal or external, nothing exists without a context. So how I look at it and how I dealt with most of the cases that when it comes to be dealing it with my own conflict or dealing with outside, or it could be any entity, it could be an individual, the organization, or you take it to any level. One of the things is that a conflict as a concept, there is a context behind it. So most of the conflict, if you look at it, it's actually a combination between two things, the content and the context. So when I talk about this conflict management, we need to really look into it. What do we manage and how do we manage it so that we can resolve it? Yin and yang, day and night, darkness and light. I mean, Ida and Pingla, you name it. This world is made of dualities, right? But then when we talk about non-duality, so there is a space. It said that the duality exists for us to understand the concept and abstract of non-duality. So I'm going to discuss in the coming few moments where I would like to see how do we look at the context and then how do we resolve the conflict.
Absolutely, Paritosh, and this is brilliant because you have brought in this physical element, and I'm sure that Anil and Ashish would love to start a debate, and if any of them feels differently about it from a philosophical lens, it's going to be a very interesting debate that we are going to have. This entire thing about faith and rationality, age-old argument and a debate, isn't it, Paritosh? Anil, your initial thoughts.
Yeah. Thank you so very much, Himanshu. It was lovely to learn about your Center of Conflict Management. I would like to begin with the Ishavasyopanishad mantra, Om Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. I am whole, complete, and perfect. So are you, whole, complete, and perfect. And so is everybody. And with this sort of a mindset within you, for everybody around, the background of conflict that actually diminishes. In this world, the whole world, you become more understanding, you become more natural, and your own stakes, your own interests, your own being. It's such that that aura pervades the ambience around you. Your own internal conflicts tend to like fade out gradually as you practice it more and more. You know, to put it simply, like whatever you have, you give that to the society. If you are happy, you can give happiness. If you are not happy, it's not possible to give happiness. If you are fearful, you cannot give an ambience of fearlessness to the world. If you are full of jealousy and hatred, the love and compassion wouldn't come out. So, whatever you have, if you are full of conflicts, those conflicts would result in the ambience around you, in the organization that you work for, in the society where you are, in the groups where you are. So, as you rightly said, that internal conflicts, as I see them, internal conflicts are the basic thing, are the basic premise from where to start for resolution of our own conflicts and for the conflicts in the society. That is how I look at it. Uh, I'll see, rather than going into the textbook management or the conflict management, I would like to elaborate and further discourse as to how I had my own conflicts in my own life and how yoga did help me in the resolution of those conflicts. And even if they were there, like disagreement of views, the disagreement, the arguments, whatever, what was the response? How could be a better response so that conflict does evolve to something better and conflict does not result into something that is harmful for uh, all parties involved, the society in general, and everybody. So that is how I would like to look at it.
Wonderful, Anil. And I love two things in what you said. That first of all, while conflict is inevitable, what we do with that conflict is a choice that we make, and that's a wonderful thing to say. And the second thing that you said was that you can give to others. I mean, you'll scarcely believe it, but in the morning session, morning India time, and the evening US session, I was moderating another panel, and I said exactly the same thing, Anil, that you can give to others what you have. If you are not healthy, you cannot take care of others. If you do not love yourself, you cannot love others either. To love others, you
Absolutely.
need to love yourself. And of course, Ashish brings in a lot of elements from his own research. Ashish, your opening statements.
I was thinking about conflict. Externally, it looks like the disagreement of the about some situation, but eventually it is the disagreement between the beliefs of two people believing different things. Uh, that is that happens to be the foundation of the conflict. When we talk about the intrinsic conflict or internal conflict, most of the time this conflict is between the Jad and Chetan. There is some Chetan in us, there is a consciousness in us which is integrated, which is whole, and there are vasanas which are floating on the as like a cloud over the sky of the integrated consciousness, and we at times start identifying with that. So uh, that's a those shad ripus, they keep invading us, our consciousness, and that creates a conflict. So internal conflict is in a way good because it tells that we are seeking truth. If we are too confident about everything, it most of the time we are wrong. So if it is intrinsic conflict, it means there's something in us is seeking the truth genuinely, honestly. So intrinsic conflict in that way is a good thing. It's a starting of the wisdom. If you look at the Yudhishthir, he's always he's always seeking advice from the teachers, his gurus, his elders. And if you look at Duryodhan, he is confident, always not having conflict most of the time. We don't see in the Duryodhan's character he's reaching out to discuss and understand things better. So intrinsic conflict is a sign of our urge to search the truth. And though this is the reflection of the three gunas we all are part of. So we need to have a witness. We need to look at how these three gunas are operating, and then taking hold of the ourself. So that is my take about the intrinsic conflict.
Very well said, Ashish. Again, the duality of the Jar and the Chetan and the consciousness and the desires. And this is very interesting because I clearly see, I'm not saying that these are two schools of thoughts, but Paritosh spoke about the duality of faith and rationality. Ashish spoke about the duality of consciousness and desires. And Anil talked about everything becoming a whole. And therefore, one of the things that perhaps we need to spend a very little time, very quickly, on what do you think are the sources of these conflicts? Because I think the solution always lies very, very close to the problem. What are the sources to these conflicts? Paritosh?
Yeah, so before I get into the source, I'd like to, how do I define who do experience conflict? Obviously, we experience conflict. So I would like to bring the notion of something called the personal reality, that the personality that we have. And I use one beautiful concept by Robert Dilt. It's called Robert Dilt model as well. If you look at the personal reality aspect, it's many blocks to it. For example, we have people behavior, the environment, the behavior, then the capability, then you have belief systems and value systems, then the I-ness, the identity, and then finally we call it the vision and the larger purpose. If you look at these blocks, conflict can arise at any of these levels. Okay, but if you go a little into the intra personal or interpersonal conflicts, largely it arises from false identification. The false identification which yoga really deals with it is that there is a concept outside, there's an object, and then we are looking at it. So when I'm looking at anything, I'm looking at my own filters actually, and the way I'm perceiving it actually is what I'm projecting. So this is something it's also talked about by the latest the modern science, which is talking about everything is Maya is your own creation, right? Everything is only one supreme consciousness, and everything is a manifestation of it, right? So when we're talking about that, the real conflict actually arises in our own mind, and it is something that we only experience. It could be not the conflict between the actual concept. For example, day and night, there is no concept. I mean, there is no conflict as such. Day is there, night is there. But the conflict may arise in which context I'm looking at it, right? And who is the person who is looking. So I see the conflict, if it is arising within, and our attachment, our fixations, our fixed way of looking at it is the main source for all conflicts. Otherwise, they are simple values. So there are one thing which is conflict, and there's another thing which is called how do you manage conflict, right? So that's what I would like to put forward for further discussion.
Wonderful, Paritosh. Anil, what do you think are the sources of conflicts?
Yeah, Himanshu. As I look at it, and when we talk about internal conflict, that is how conflicts begin actually in the external world also. So for the internal conflict, whether I do this or I do that, I want to have so much of the interests and the stakes more than all my peers, my competitors. I'm jealous. I'm full of all those things. And all these emotions, they bring in the internal conflict in my way of being. And this internal way of being reflects into my interactions with my colleagues around, in the organization, in the society, in the country, at whichever level I am dealing with. And when these internal conflicts and these internal emotions, they transfer onto my interactions with the outer world, then first thing that comes is ego, as I look at it. That whatever I say, whatever view I hold is absolutely infallible. It's the best, and there's nothing can be wrong about it. That's the first thing like that makes me believe that whatever I say like has to be truth, and that has to be accepted, and that has to be the way of life for everybody else. Second part, which is related to this, and I look at it, is attachment to my belief, attachment to my viewpoint, attachment to whatever I have. And third is like, uh, as I said, all the emotions that we have, that we harbor, jealousy, hatred, fear, desires, all those things, they fuel all these things. They fuel this attachment, they fuel this ego. So, and they fuel and they result into our interactions with the rest of the world. So these, I look at it as the sources, the major sources of conflict. And the internal sources of conflict, they transfer onto the conflicts elsewhere around, in the organization and society, in groups, and everywhere around.
Absolutely, Anil. And, I would just add one more consequence of this attachment that you spoke about, and that is anger. Anger comes
Yeah,
purely out of attachment. आप तभी क्रोधित होंगे यदि आपकी
बिल्कुल,
किसी व्यक्ति, वस्तु, विषय व स्थान के प्रति आसक्ति है. And
बिल्कुल
therefore,
ठीक बात है.
this anger comes purely from this attachment that you spoke about. Ashish, what do you think are the sources of conflict?
There are two words, manasthiti and paristhiti. So source are generally manasthiti, which gets reflected in paristhiti. In
Brilliant.
manasthiti we talk about man, buddhi, chit, ahankar. Chit is little bit kind of stable. Most of the conflict are arising because of avidya and avivek. Avidya means identifying with that which you are not. So that is the result that is primarily driven by man. Man makes you man and ego. The cocktail of man and ego, man and ahankar, makes that's a source of avidya. And when this happens, avivek happens, and avivek is the problem of buddhi, because buddhi has a job to distinguish things, which is not able to because of, as Anilji says, attachment and so many things, and that is arising out of that cocktail. So then the avivek comes. So avidya and avivek results in manasthiti, which is conflictual, and that results in through the paristhiti.
Great. So I think this is very beautifully, it has been explained by everybody. And now let's get in a little deeper, because I want to actually probe into your personal experiences. So obviously with yoga, at least in my case, I have managed to resolve a lot of conflicts. And I happen to be a mountaineer, so nothing better than going to my Himalayas and doing my yoga there, and obviously reflecting and introspecting. Because one of the axioms that I've lived by, it's a Socratic axiom, and he says that an unexamined life is not worth living. And that's a beautiful statement. An unexamined life is not worth living. And yoga actually allows us to examine our own lives. So Anil, I'll start with you this time. How has yoga managed to resolve conflicts for you? I mean, I'll be grateful if you can cite a personal experience.
I'll try to do that. Before that, a little theory. I read somewhere that half the time, some researchers say that half the time we are not aware of what we are doing. We are working, and only imagine half of our waking hours, we are just not aware of what we are doing. Second thing is that we are happier when we are aware of what we are doing. So many things that keep on happening in our own minds. We are not even aware of that. Like we have some desires, we have suppressed them somewhere. We have jealousy, we have suppressed them elsewhere, and they keep on coming. They result in those conflicts. Yoga, first of all, as a theory, yoga is chitta vritti nirodha. The definition of the yoga is chitta vritti nirodha. When we silence all these things and we can be aware of what's happening at each moment, I can be present at each moment of what's happening with me. I can be aware of what's happening with me in my life. It opens a whole new perspective, not only with respect to me, with respect to like the person in front of me. I don't listen to only my voice in my own head. I don't respond immediately the moment I listen to. I don't respond to that. I just listen to what you are saying in the perspective, in the context that you are saying, and that changes the entire dimension of the this thing. I got into yoga around seriously interested and passionately interested about 15 years back, and that was the time when I read Gita thoroughly. I मैंने पूरी गीता कंठस्थ भी की उस समय करीब करीब, और अभी भी I can recite most of the shlokas just offhand, and so was the Yog Darshan. And at that point of time, that transformed the experience of that meditation, the experience of being aware, that transformed my whole way of being. In a way, I'll just give one example. Before that, like being in a particular posting, what a great deal. And a government job, whatever, like this is the job that I like, and this is the job that, and why would I like that? There's no answer. Just because everybody said that this was a better job, this was a better posting, therefore I wanted that posting. But once I got into this yoga and meditation seriously, then entire dimension changed. Wherever I was, I found something to be happy about, and there was lot to be done in that particular posting where I was. This completely transformed my way of being. This completely transformed like the way I would behave in the organization where I was posted, and I was happy. And if I was happy, the people around me, hopefully, I don't know, my subordinates would say that better. But hopefully they were happier a lot, and they were more inspired lot with that way of being. So this is that I could see for myself. There have been so many conflicts in life, which I think it has helped me. This way of being has helped me through yoga and meditation, and maybe that if time permits, I'll come to that later.
Wonderful, Anil. And Ashish, I know that you have done some studies where you have looked at how can yoga resolve a conflict even at a larger level of a collective. Could you just talk about that?
Yeah, so thanks very much. It so happened about 2 years ago. We got to know about a port in the eastern part of India, which was acquired by a very well-known business house from another very well-known business house. It was earlier a joint venture, and then this one company which acquired it. There was a situation where the land acquisition had to happen, and many people whose land was acquired, though they were compensated, they also got the job, but they had a grudge against the management. That was one of the reasons. And then there's the politics, and there is vested interest also working in this kind of situation. They exploit. There are elements which wish to exploit the situation. So there was the conflict started, and in fact, actually, it erupted very badly. They burned the school. They burned the company's property, and all that happened. And that was the time when the management decided to have some intervention which is beyond negotiation, which is beyond like collective bargaining. It was about calming the minds, making people to calm down and see the situation as it is, and then decide what is needed. That was the time when Art of Living was enrolled, and they designed a program called Harmony Program. The core process was Sudarshan Kriya, and very rarely it happens in the Indian organizations. that the program was not only offered to the full-time employees, managers, workers, full-time workers of the company, but also offered to the contract workers. And that was offered on the office hours. So that they should not assume that, okay, so that that does not become a matter of conflict, that you ask me to do the full-time work and then make us to attend the program. So that much was done for the hundreds of employees. My PhD scholar and I visited that place. We were there about a week. My scholar spent even longer duration. And we have had, I personally had 80 interviews and at least 7-8 focus group discussions. The very interesting thing we found is that if you talk to most of the HR people, they know that it is difficult to get people out of the workstations for the training. Here was the situation where supervisors were after HR people. Please get these people also trained, and when is the next batch is coming, and I would like to nominate these many people, because they were able to see a difference in the attitude. People were not trying to use the situation to create the conflict. They become more responsible and responsive, and that was a major cultural shift in the organization. And the core of that was the art of living, the Sudarshan Kriya process. We have studied it. This became eventually the PhD work of our scholar, and this PhD was awarded by Academy of Management MSR division as the most promising thesis dissertation award. So that gives us really satisfaction that we could see how the Indian traditional wisdom is being used in the modern management, and there is a lot which can be learned from this traditional wisdom, can be passed on to the contemporary management.
Wonderful, Ashish. So, this was one of those pieces that was missing so far as research in yoga was considered and concerned. So causality was not being established. And I'm so glad that you have at least started on that path. And I'm sure the next step is going to be to create some kind of an experimental method where you can actually establish causality. Paritosh, you have been an ardent student and obviously a teacher of another school of thought in yoga, Kriya Yoga, and of course, Anil and I, we read like maniacs. And when it comes to Kriya Yoga, everything goes back to Babaji. And I'm sure that you have been greatly influenced by his work. Now, do let us know and our viewers know about some incident from your life where yoga managed to help you in resolving a conflict, your own or somebody else's.
Sure. So a couple of things I would like to mention, and it is so well articulated by both Anil and so nothing different, but I'll give you a couple of my experiences from my personal life. I was in a pretty bad shape some 10, 12 years back, and I have no qualms in admitting I was on antidepressant. And it was a classic case of the internal conflict that I had. And this is a time when I was struggling whether to be in the corporate or completely leave and go out, right? And this tussle was, I mean, I can't tell you, I mean, I was just pulling my hair. So I reached to that level actually. And those are the times where I did maximum of these explorations. Okay. And one of the things which I would like to mention, which I practiced, obviously the experience of Kriya Yoga and some of those practices definitely helped me in transcending, I'm just saying that transcending some of these personal reality aspects, which really, in fact, Anil also spoke about it, that we have a situation right now and you have to make a decision, right? Let's say the conflict is between A and B and you have to choose one. Even if you manage to do or something, even as a group, you have to choose either this or that, right? So the conflict resolution is not to really identify this is good or this is bad. It is actually how do you accept any one outcome, right? That's where the real resolution is. That's where the people are left with completeness, wholeness, and complete acceptance. That's what gives you the happiness. When we have an stimulus, there is a reaction to it. But why this happens is because we think stimulus and response, but there is a whole and there is no gap, but there is a big gap, and that is you actually. That's the space is you. How do you claim it? I think that's where the yoga comes and many practices comes. When you become mindful about it, you become an observer than a person who is totally indulged into it. Yeah, you are a person who is looking at things from a detached point of view rather than being attached to it. Because I have seen the conflict, the impact of the conflict, whether it leads to ambiguity or difficulty in taking decision, is high when your individual, I'm saying this, highlighting this, when your personal consequences are important, then this conflict becomes very big. But if it is not individual, personal, but the larger context, you become very clear about what to choose, A or B, right? So I always found out that transcending you gives you a much better insight into what to be done. And I'll give you one. So for me, the pranayam helped me like anything. It actually, what it does, it puts you into such a calmer state of mind. And obviously, I use two or three of them, that you are able to accept many things and see things very clearly. That's one. But I will give one more because Dr. Himanshu, you asked me about one meditation which I have taught also to some of the people. I read something about in the Mandukya Upanishad, we talk about the Paravani, right? The Paravani is the highest intelligence that we are talking about, right? And actually, this is way beyond mind. I mean, the language we speak is called Vakri, right? But there is a language in which we think, and that language is Madhyama. Obviously, Madhyama is supposed to be there, the power of thoughts. It's much, much more powerful than what we speak, right? Then there is another language which is called Pashyat, which is the power of intention. And that is a language in which you communicate to the dog, right? That I love you, you speak in Telugu or Hindi or English, he gets it, right? But there is beyond it something called Paravani, which is silence. And in that silence is what you get many answers. I don't know how many people actually have experienced this, that you are completely engrossed into something, right? And you are not finding any solution. But maybe you will walk out of home, walking in the park, walking in some other places, and suddenly some insights dawns into you and you find some answers. And I'm saying this is something which everybody has experienced, but there is a design way of doing it as well, which I call it meditation on silence, which also call it meditation on the fourth syllable, means a, u, ma, and the silence, right? That's where I have seen that if you just surrender your eye completely into the silence, means try and listen to the silence without desire, without even looking for the answer, it's when you get the answer. The answer is very simple. It's just like this. We have this habit of putting it here, glasses, and searching for it, right? Sometimes we search, we don't get it. But then, whenever you are calm, doing something where you get completely disconnected, you get the answer. Right? I'm saying this is not a process which is an accident. Is that we experience it accidentally, right? But there is a whole design aspect of it, and yoga and meditation, the certain practices can actually make you experience. I have taught this to many people, and they have these insights. And I believe that some of these tools are way beyond strategizing what you call conflict management. I mean, there is aspects there as well. Um, we can also use that, but many of the insight, particularly when it comes to your internal, right, and as a leader also, once you transcend, things becomes very clear. You are director of, let's say, an institute. You are in this senior most position, and you will have to deal with many ambiguous things. You have to go sometimes beyond rules. Follow this or follow that, follow or don't follow. You may get caught into that situation. But the moment you put the context high and you aside, I think you know the answer, what decision to take. And that's where I'm leaving.
Yeah, absolutely, Paritosh. That's very well described. And particularly, I think the point that comes out of what you said is that one of the big mistakes that a lot of people make when it comes to yoga is that they look at it from a very narrow, blinkered perspective of asana and pranayama. While it is extremely important, but let's not forget that these are just the two limbs of the Ashtanga Yog. You have the
Right.
Yam, you have the Niyam, and then you have the asana and pranayam. And these are the things that you can do, the Yam, Niyam, asana, and pranayam. And subsequently, they lead to the consequences depending on your mastery over the first four in terms of the pratyahar, dharana, dhyan, and samadhi. So therefore, the dhyan that you're talking about is a consequence that will perhaps come from a long period of disciplined practice of the first four. And one of the
Can I
things
add
that
one point to this? Can I add
Sure,
one
sure.
point to it? So, some people have this notion that this Ashtanga yoga system is kind of steps. But actually, if you really look at the experience of many of the masters, right, it can start anywhere. It can start, Ashtanga means there are 8 angs, but it can start anywhere. And actually, if you surrender to any one of them, right, it expands in all 8. And that's why we have 4, many schools of so-called yoga, right? Raja Yoga, Karma Yoga, and many
So
other
the,
systems.
the key is just to begin. The key is just to begin wherever you can. Now, one of the things that is of keen interest to everyone. One of the things that I personally see is that many people don't come out with their conflict. So somewhere we have ingrained it into the minds of the people that talking about conflicts is a sign of weakness. How do we make this discourse around conflict as mainstream? How do we take that stigma out of that? Ashish, I'll start with you this time.
So, being an academic, I have this natural urge to start to share my research work and the research work of my team. So thankful for my mentors and the bright scholars who have been working for a few years. What we have found is, and that's where we left our conversation in the last round, is about, is there a causality? What are the variables which lead yoga towards conflict resolution? And our first study was, and these studies actually arise from your own experience. If you have not experienced it, you can't think about these variables. Though you show that they being coming from the literature, but until you are convinced with your own experience, it will not be visible in the literature as well. So in the first study, we looked at the yoga practice and its impact on subjective vitality and self-transcendence, and that leads to psychological capital. We did the control experiment, control group, experiment group. We did it with our MBA students, those who have gone through this process. Their academic scores improved, their focus to the course improved, their engagement in their course also improved. And all this is internationally published studies in the Journal of Business Ethics and Journal of Management. So now that's what yoga does. It increases the subjective vitality, and as Paritosh was explaining, self-transcendent, our ability to see ourselves. So that led to another construct which we call metacognition, mindful metacognition. So the third got added in next study, where we looked at the metacognition, because I am able to look at the system as an outsider. And when I am out of mess, even for few moments, and those are the moments being created in the intense, committed, focused pranayam and dhyan practice. Many times pranayam and dhyan have this interface. In those spaces, answers emerge, and so that's how the mindful metacognition happened. And then we thought, okay, what is actually the source of all these three? Can we keep adding the mediators, or is there some other source to it? And there came this construct nowadays being very popular, अंतर्दृष्टि तो हम हमेशा से कहते ही थे, interoceptive awareness. So interoception. So there is something called perception, our ability to look at the outside, giving attention to the outside stimulus, and then there is interoception. Interoception. So that interoception is weak, and that's why we avoid conflict. We avoid conflict because most of the time I have the habit of being in the violent state, mental state. I develop the habit of remaining in anger. I develop the habit of remaining in the judgmental state, and I think I start confusing that being the natural state of life. But if we create some practice, some space through some practice, that interoceptive awareness arises, and that makes us able to see there is some problem, there is some issue with me. And when I am able to see the issue, naturally I will be aware and I would like to resolve it. And how yoga becomes even more powerful, other than creating the interoceptive awareness, if you have some experience of inner joy, if you have experienced even few times in your life that breathing itself is joy, it happens. But when you realize, okay, nothing else, possessions, consumption, not anything, but breathing itself is joy. If you do it and if you reach to that state, you would like to go back to that state. And to go back to that stage, you would not like to retain nonsense in your mind. So when I have experienced that, तो महाव्रत जो पतंजलि कहते हैं, ब्रह्मचर्य, सत्य, अपरिग्रह, अहिंसा, they are inevitable, because if you inculcate ahimsa, you will not be able to experience that joy, and you need that joy. So we don't, just to conclude, we don't talk about conflict because our interoceptive awareness is low, and we are not able to see how it is preventing us to experience the inner integrated constant joy. You make us to see that and experience that joy. Once we experience the joy, we cannot live without resolving this internal and extrinsic conflict.
So the taste of the pudding lies in its eating, and if give people the flavor of the joy that would come out. And you're right, Ashish. We do so much. People do so much of exercises. They do gym. They do Pilates for their body. They try to take care of everything. But the one thing that keeps us alive and moving and conscious, which is breathing, we don't practice that. We believe that it happens naturally and we don't need to practice over that. And you brought it out so well. But Anil and Paritosh, you guys shared your personal experiences. And Anil, the entire comment section is replete with people talking about how beautifully you have explained, and particularly from your own life. It takes a lot of courage to come and acknowledge the conflict that you might be going through. So I'll start with you, Anil, since both Anil and Paritosh, both of you have been courageous to share the conflicts that you faced and how you overcame them. Anil, what suggestion do you have to others so that they can actually get that courage to talk about the conflicts inside them?
See, conflict by definition is disagreement, the difference of views. When we are talking about external conflict, disagreement of views is not bad in itself. This is just an event. I like to share an equation. Event itself is not good or bad. Event plus response is the outcome. While event we cannot control, response is what we control completely. And response is 90% of the outcome. Same event with completely altered response would be absolutely pleasurable event. So that is when we learn that. And response is what comes through yoga and meditation. Two comments on to what Paritosh said, pranayam ke bare mein. Pranayam is like, even in Patanjali Yog Darshan, there's a sutra called Tatah Kshiyate Prakashavaranam. So pranayam is very important. It's the primary step, preliminary step to dhyan, and then It gives you that sort of a inkling. It gives you that sort of a space where you can see yourself, where you can observe yourself. Secondly, as Ashish said, when we can observe ourselves as an outsider, that brings a whole new dimension. Whole new dimension. Why negotiation between two parties is preferred by a third negotiator? And if you can look, and if you can look yourself as an observer, as an independent observer, if you can do that, and that is what whole meditation is all about, that you can observe your being, each moment you're present, you're aware. So that is what it is all about. And then coming back to like Ashtanga Yoga, your ahimsa, your aparigraha, I take one moment. Like aparigraha is not hoarding more than what you need. I like to take an example from here. I used to love driving. And if you love driving, you love cars and bikes and all those things. And then they have to be expensive also at times. But at certain point of time, when I got deep into this thing, and I realized that okay, for driving is fine, but then it's not necessary for me to own expensive cars. For my utility, for my utility, say a Ciaz or a Mercedes, they serve the same purpose. And then I did not need that. So for some time, Maruti Ciaz was my like okay, this is what I need. So that was my need. Then I started going on bicycle at some point of time to my office. For about 3, 4 months, 5 months, I went on a bicycle to my office, and I came in touch with some bicycle groups, and with that I bought a bicycle, and then I started liking it, and then I started going to offices with that. Then I realized that even car was not needed in my life. And then at one point of time, I made it a point that I'm too dependent on this official list of paraphernalia. So let me free myself of this. And I chose to go on a completely unplanned, on a completely public transport, a trip, a solo trip to Kedarnath. And I went there, and then I realized that you actually don't need anything in your life. So whatever you add, so that was the level of aparigraha from coming to this, from coming to expensive cars, and that has made life so easy. That has made life absolutely wonderful, wonderfully easy. All those, I all the time I feel that I have more than what I need. So I feel myself completely rich, very rich all the time. I may have same amount of money, but I feel much more richer. So that is the completely different space that I am in, and this is just with respect to one thing. And same thing transcends in every which way. Ahimsa and Santosh that it gives. Santosh, Santoshat Anuttam Sukhlabha. लाइक क्या है, गोधन गर्जन बारिधन और रतन धन खान, जब आवे संतोष धन सब धन धूरे समान. So actually, it can't be explained. It can't be explained because once you have desires, you just can't see like how can santosh come. And if you think that like if santosh comes, then how would you work for more? Why will you work for more? But then with santosh, with contentment, if you work for more, that's absolutely different way of being and different way of working. That brings a different quality to your work and to your way of being. Completely different quality. That's relaxed, that's joyful, uh, that's looking at it whole perspective. So these are the things that I have experienced in my own life. And well, then asana, pranayam, and going on to meditation. Meditation is the ultimate thing that one can have, one can observe and see, and like see what you are doing with your own mind, inside your own mind. And so that is absolutely a mind a mind opener, and a different ballgame altogether. And that could completely resolve your own internal conflicts, and that could help you plan your response better to any event, to be in equanimity, to be joyful, and to spread that joy, to spread the equanimity, to spread that sense of peace around you wherever you are. This is
Absolutely.
what I have been experiencing in my own life.
Absolutely, Anil. And you talk about Santosh, and Santosh along with Shauch, Tap, Swadhyay, and Ishwar Pranidhan make the 5 niyams which, if
Absolutely.
inculcated, will make people come out with whatever differences they have within themselves. Paritosh, there's been a question, so I will put that question along with your thoughts on how can people come out. And this is, why do we take everything so personally? This because you spoke about it earlier as well. So how can people come out of this?
I would see. I'll give a very answer which is coming more from the neurology aspect of it. Okay, because we don't say that we take things personally right from very beginning. I'll give you one incident. I mean, one piece of information. You know, when a small child is there, when they're born, you know what they say? The baby wants to play. Baby wants to eat. They will say baby as a third person, right? Around around 2.5 years, right? First time they say, I want to play, right? That's the time when the concept of I gets in, right? And then taking it out consciously takes lifetime. Okay, right? So this idea of I, the identification is projected. Ultimately, we get it, right? So when we get it, that's the time you start associating it. And every experience that we have after that is experienced by this mind and body complex only through association. Otherwise, you can't make a meaning. For example, you know, let's say, for example, we say that, okay, I'm attending a webinar along with, you know, Dr. Himanshu, right? A child will say, what is, who is this webinar? What is this Himanshu? They can't relate. You get that? But there is some definition which is getting created. I'll give another aspect to it. Just look at this. One of the thing, you know, what Mr. Anil was talking about, experiencing things. Experience. Certain things need to be experienced, right? And I would say that everything need to be experienced neurologically. Let me tell you, you are born, right? Then you, on your bed, you are able to turn, sometimes sit, then walk, right? Then talk, then eat, then run, then walk, then cycle, then swimming. Everything. Tell me one thing you understood first and then you got it. Actually, none. You first experienced it, then you understood it. Now what is the problem is that we want to understand first and then experience. That's where our learning ability goes down. And I'm saying this is all neurological, right? So when we look at all of these aspects, I would say that when it comes to the conflict management part of it, we are looking at it from personal point of view, and we'll continue to do that. We will not be, because we make meaning through that only. Mind is a meaning making machine. It has to make a meaning for anything, but what meaning it will create is based on the definitions which you already have. Otherwise you will not be able to make any meaning out of it. So our association increases and keeps on increasing. And that's what we call it our inner world. This is our inner world, and that's what we experience outer world. This is creation through experience. Somewhere we have to find a way of disrupting this, getting detached, also experiencing it. And I'll give an example to this. Neurologically, what we see that there is a direct connections between the physical body and we call it our neurology. And now let's say brain is not mind. So what brain does is mind. Okay. So when I say that, means everything that I do physically has an impact on neurology, and that's why on our psychology. For example, they say that if an instrument, somebody is playing an instrument with a left hand, you play sitar, you play violin, right? You are using right hand and then you are using tips. It has been found scientifically that people who play this violin and using these fingers, on the right brain, there is a particular loop in the brain which develops like a muscle, and there are a lot of crisscross connections, and that's why they are more intelligent. Intelligence is what? Harnessing more processing, or what you call perceptions, everything. That's what you do that, right? So we need to experience something beyond my mind says. I mean, we should be open enough to experience things, and we should be able to disrupt it. So how do we disrupt? If your mind, if your body can't control your breath physically, mechanically, I've seen that over a period of time, you develop that faculty and body comes. Like emotions, I don't get into it. Why? Because emotion is an outcome. Emotion is a complete biochemistry, right? It's an outcome. Nobody can control emotions. You can control the triggers which triggers the emotion, right? So these are the two ways, either physically or through breath. These are the two things. One thing can be used to control the other. Vice versa is also true. And that's what we can utilize to really calm down. And there are certain practices which can really see you, put you in a mental state where you will be able to make your choice, right, without conflict. I'm saying making choice without conflict, not that the conflict will not be there. One of the questions you asked, discussing whether it is conflict is good or bad or what, I say that conflict is what is helping us develop, and particularly the internal conflict. If it is not there, we'll be dumb. It's the source, as I think both Mr. Anil said and Mr. Assis both said this. That is the beginning point. This is where. So what is required is, how do we look at conflict? We need to change this idea. Conflict is an added opportunity. Are you able to see that? That's where probably we need to train. We need to have a new view. And personal life, it has been like, my life has been torn with this, and it's not even easy. If I tell you that managing conflict is easy, I'll be lying. But the only thing, what is happening now, earlier this conflict used to kill me for months and years together. Now it takes few hours or a day. That's all I can say. But when it arises, there has to be a turmoil, and there has to be something which need to be done, and then the insight comes, right? Either internal, same thing goes outwardly as well. You look at person living. What happened when you have two person within you fighting with each other, dil aur dimag ke beech mein? It can lead to a split personality kind of a psychological disorder, right? But what happens, I remember you talked about going to mountain, right? You go, as you go higher, your view changes, right? So when you have two things at the some concept level, you keep raising it to the higher context, you will see there is a threshold beyond which conflict is not there.
Absolutely,
we need to
Paritosh.
learn to raise the context. That's what I'm saying.
Absolutely. And it was so delightful talking to all of you that we didn't even realize that we are already 5 minutes past our time. And therefore, we are going to conclude right now. There's just one question, which is a googly question, and therefore I'm going to bat it. There's a question saying, what do you think about yoga gurus who play mediator in political situations? And I would like to tell you, yoga karmasu kaushalam. So what we need to understand is that doing anything with full dexterity is what yoga is all about. And the corollary to that is that a yogi, by very definition of being a yogi, will do something in a very good way. So I'm not going to talk about yoga gurus, but I'm going to talk about yogis. And therefore, if there is a yogi who's taking care of the mediation, be it between political parties or be it between any party who have a conflict with each other, he or she is certainly going to do a good job out of it. And if I were to summarize everything that all three of you said, was this very brilliant thing about things that we have a control on and things that we do not have a control on. And I think more often than not, we tend to spend and waste a lot of time on those things which are not within our control. I always keep telling people that always divide things into two areas. One is your area of concern, the other is your area of influence. Area of concern is something that is not within your control, whereas area of influence is something which is within your control. Focus on that. So like what Paritosh said, that you have the man and then you have the breath. You can't control the mind. The mind is not in your control, but what drives the mind is your breath. And therefore, when you do pranayama, you control your breath. And through that, you can control the mind. Anil talked about the whole point of people getting angry, but also staying angry. And he said that there are some things which are a matter of choice. The situation is not in your hand. What you do in that situation, Ashish spoke about that situation. What you do with that situation is a matter of your choice. Getting upset over something is natural. Staying angry is a choice. Disliking something or someone is natural. Nurturing hatred for a long time is a choice. And therefore, I believe what yoga does is it helps us in making the right choices. Samaniva atmuti samana hridayaniva samanamastuvo mana yatha vassussahasati. When through yoga, we can actually bring what we think, what we speak, and what we do into some kind of a harmonic consonance. That's where we enter into the silence that Paritosh was speaking about, and we get into a reflective mode. And please remember, a life full of continuous action can never be a melodious life. Life has to be interspersed with periods of silences when you reflect, when you introspect, and you ask yourself, what is it that you're doing and why is it that you're doing? And that is when you bring your heart, mind, and intellect at the same level and at that level of peacefulness, that is when you lead a life which is not merely full of achievements, but that of fulfillment. So thank you very much to all my panelists for bringing those wonderful insights into this panel discussion. And thank you very much for all the viewers for staying with us. Thank you. Back to you, Sagar.
Wow, what an amazing webinar. You all explained the different aspects of management of conflict so beautifully. Shri Paritosh ji, I loved how you explained what we are trying to manage and how to resolve the conflict. I also really liked that glasses analogy you explained and connected with all of the conflicts. It happens to all of us all the time. We put the glasses on our heads, search for it everywhere on our room, in our house, but it's always just on our heads. What a wonderful way to connect the analogy with conflict management. Shri Anil Kumarji, I really loved how you said that the internal conflicts we have are the basic conflicts we should resolve. I also really like how you gave a perfect personal example for this webinar. Professor Ashish ji, I really love the way you brought the different aspects of the different gunas and how they relate with conflict management. And Dr. Rai, thank you for the wonderful moderation. You tied in the ideas of each and every one of our speakers so perfectly. And I love the way you connected the Sanskrit mantra to the management of our conflict. And I completely agree with you with what you said, that we all need lots of courage to give our own personal example to properly explain what conflict management is. Once again, I would like to take this opportunity to tell all of our speakers today that how wonderful this webinar became because of all of your presence. And for our viewers, our next webinar, The Effect of Yoga and Stress and Aging, will be on 11th June from 8:45 to 10 p.m. CST or 7:15 to 8:30 a.m. IST. Everyone, please mark your calendars for this upcoming informative webinar. And before we end, I would like to thank our tech team, Akashji and Riteshji, because without them, this webinar would not have been so flawless as it was. Once again, I would like to thank all of our viewers for joining us for this webinar. I hope you all enjoyed this webinar today and have a great rest of your day in the United States and a good night to those in India. Namaste.